Hey guys, Lucas here, and today I want to give you guys my 6-month impression of shooting with the Z6II. So we did a video of my first impression way back when I got the camera, and today I want to talk about how I feel after 6 months. Like, do I still like it? Do I not? You know, wait till the end of the video to find out. Just kidding, I'm not going to do the clickbait crap with you guys. I'm going to tell you straight right now, yes, the camera is still worth it to me. I still have no regrets about buying it, but I did find a couple of things that are kind of nuisances about how to use the camera. Some stuff that I had already mentioned in the initial video, but I'm gonna underline again, and a couple of things that I discovered after using it for a while that were kind of surprising as time went on. But overall, I do like the camera, and I'm also gonna talk about why I think it's totally was a great purchase. And in fact, to the point that I doubled down and I got my first Z lens for the camera that I purchased myself. So we're gonna get to shooting, and I'll talk about the camera a bit more as we go.
Explore.
All right, so right off the bat, cool shot opportunity. We're shooting the intro, and Axel is like, look behind you, look at this awesome sunset. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, that actually lets me talk about the very first thing, because I had to do it for this shot. And that is that, like, the main nuisance, or it's a small thing, but on my D4, what I'm used to is that there is a mode button on the right side here. And when I press the mode button with the back wheel, I can change from aperture mode to manual mode. But I can't do that on this camera. There's this dial, which has all these things that I never use, like auto, U2, whatever, P. Of course, P mode is, you know, I really just use A and M. But I have to switch hands to this side to change it. And those of you who watch this channel a lot know that I like to use this kind of concept of like a slow mode and a fast mode. So I use aperture mode with a minimum shutter speed setting when I need speed, and then I switch to M when I want to go slow. And I'm realizing that that's very tedious because I switch between these two a lot. On my D4 with the mode button, that was really easy. On this camera without the mode button, it's really tedious. So what I've been doing recently is I just keep it on M all the time, and I just switch, you know, change the aperture, or sorry, the shutter speed as needed. So when I want it slow, I make it slow. When I want it fast, I make it fast. Honestly, that's very like obvious. That's probably how I should have done it all along. But because I had that convenient mode button on the D4, it was very comfortable to do it that way. So that's not a big demerit, not a big kind of issue, but it was a small nuisance that took some getting used to for me, and it kind of had to change how I shoot. Okay, so no more A. Basically, I shoot on M all the time, except for maybe in broad daylight where A is totally fine. But at night, I use M 100% of the time with auto ISO for the most part. All right, let's keep going. All right, so we're gonna explore Omoide Yokocho, memory lane, which we did exactly at the same place in the first impression video. So I feel like I want to retrace my steps, cover the same area. And so the next demerit, the next nuisance I want to talk about is one that I already talked about in that video, but I can just underline that it is a nuisance. And that is this idea that when you're using the auto area AF mode, which chooses for you where it's going to focus and where it's going to track, for example, using eye tracking, then to get to the subject tracking mode, which is kind of like the 3D tracking in my old D4, you have to push the OK button. Or I have it set to these function buttons, or to this function button on the side, wherever. It's cool that you can set it to the function buttons. It's still annoying that you have to even press it at all. I wish it was just its own standalone mode, where I could just select having subject tracking mode be on all the time, 100%. That's it. That's how it should be, in my opinion. I don't understand why it's a secondary mode under auto area AF. That's a weird user experience decision for me. So still a nuisance, not a big one. I guess I can get over it, but I don't like it. All right, let's go down a little bit. And actually, as I focus and kind of, you know, try to shoot a photo here, it very conveniently brings me to my third kind of nuisance or demerit of this camera compared to my D4, which I'm used to. And this is one that I didn't talk about at all in the other video, in the first impression, something I discovered over time. And that is that the metering is a little bit finicky, to put it lightly. Like, it can be kind of inconsistent. And I wasn't sure why. At first I blamed the metering itself. I thought the metering maybe just kind of sucks, but that's not the case. The issue comes back to exactly what I was just talking about, which is this difference between auto area AF and the subject tracking mode. And actually, even though I use the matrix metering, or, you know, the one that meters just kind of everything, other brands call it like multi-segment or evaluative, whatever. Nikon calls it matrix metering. when I'm on that and I'm using auto area AF, it's certainly doing the matrix metering. But when you switch to subject tracking, the metering mode changes to like more of a spot. And I'm not actually sure, is it like fully spot or like a weighted spot? But the metering actually changes a little bit. So that's annoying because I like to focus with subject tracking, but then release the track because I don't need to focus anymore because I'm using back button focus. And then the focusing mode, the meter changes a little bit. So I wish that these two things were just separated, that regardless of whether I'm using subject tracking or evaluative metering, that the auto area AF, the metering is just the same. And this would be solved if it was just two separate modes, like I was saying. Okay, so I'm going to try to show you guys an example of this using the lights here. All right, and you see if I move the tracking point around, the exposure changes, which is not the behavior that I want. Okay, so it's kind of frustrating because what I want is, regardless of where I'm focusing, I want the camera to meter the whole scene, which is what matrix metering is for. And yet, as I change where I'm focusing, it's changing the metering, and that's not the behavior. That's like spot metering, which is fair enough. Spot metering is a thing, but that's not what I want to be using right now. So if I focus on one of the lamps, my ISO is 640, but when I focus on the area below, where it's darker, the ISO jumps to 1600. So I'm going to show these photos without any editing to make it clear that this is because the focus point is moving, focusing up there on the lamp versus down there on the road. And yeah, I'm kind of repeating myself, but this drives me crazy. I guess now that I know how it works, I can kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Compensate for it. So I could, for example, focus using subject tracking first. Once I acquire my focus, I could turn subject tracking off and go back to the regular auto area AF, and then the metering doesn't change as much. Anyway, it would just be solved if subject tracking was its own mode. So that's my biggest pet peeve on the whole camera. All right, let's keep going a little bit. Yeah. I should underline that it would be all well and good if it was always like this, but when I was using my D4, it didn't behave this way. So that's the other thing, is in the D4, even when you're using 3D tracking and you're tracking a subject in terms of focus, if you have it set to evaluative metering, it meters the whole scene while it's doing the 3D tracking. And that's not the behavior now. So it'd be nice if there was a setting for this as well, just a simple setting to say, okay, when I'm using the subject tracking, please keep using the matrix metering, don't change suddenly to spot metering, which is not what I want. Anyway, something to get used to. Not a deal breaker, but annoying. Let's keep going a little this way. Cool. I should say that if I knew how this worked from day one, it wouldn't have been so frustrating. It's the fact that I didn't really understand this, and it doesn't, maybe it says in the manual, but who reads those, right? It took me a long time to realize why the metering is kind of unreliable and all over the place. And actually, those of you who watched our recent Osaka video heard me complaining about this, and since that video, so literally in the last couple of weeks, is when I figured this out, of how this actually works. Because I was just fed up, and I just experimented until I realized what's going on. And that brings me to one last little pet peeve in the camera, which is, again, it's all about this subject tracking. When you use it, at the bottom of the viewfinder, you'll have this little note that says, like, you are now subject tracking. And if you don't want to, press OK. And honestly, who decided to have this there all the time? It is totally pointless. As the owner of the camera and regular user, I know what to do to get in and out of subject tracking. I don't need to be reminded of it. And it actually blocks some of what I'm looking at, which is one of those like little nuisances that made me so slow to get into mirrorless cameras in the first place. Because in an optical viewfinder, I know there's not going to be anything in my way blocking my view. And in an EVF, they leave this annoying interface stuff. It's just annoying. It's such a tiny thing, but I wish they would update the firmware and get rid of it. All right, so those are all of my pet peeves about the camera, my nuisances or demerits. It's really not that much stuff. It's all has to really do with this, how subject tracking works versus how it used to work on the old camera, plus the thing with the dial and, you know, so not much stuff. So now I want to talk about why, even though it has these little nuisances, why after 6 months I love this camera and I'm glad to be shooting with it to this day. All right, so we're gonna go into the middle of the street here in Kabukicho, right on the edge. And we're gonna do some slow shutter techniques with the Z6. Because with those, I wanna highlight kind of the main cool thing that I like about this camera. Well, it's not the main thing, but it's one of those things that going from the D4 to the Z6 was a huge change for me, and that is the IBIS. And now that I have a Z lens, I'm actually using the full potential of the IBIS, because something I found out recently, you only get, with an old F lens, you only get 3 axis, and with the Z lens, you actually get the full 5 axis. So the stabilization is better with the Z lens. And I mean, this is one of the things that really changed how I shoot with the camera, because basically I just have more opportunities to use slow shutter techniques, and really slow shutter techniques, down to a 10th or a 5th. Even if I hold my breath and prop it up just right, down to a second, which is what I want to try here. I want to see if I can do some 1 second exposures of cars going by. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put it on 1 second. Okay, and then F probably 5/6 or something like that. We get low. Okay. And actually I need to go even smaller on the aperture. I got to go to 11 or even 16 to get the exposure I want. Okay. And we'll see what we get here. Plenty of traffic. You know, I'm pretty rock steady right now, but I do feel my hand's shaking a little bit. You know, I'm not a statue. Let's do one more. Let's see how those turned out. Now, obviously, they can look really sharp in the camera, and then when you see on the screen later, they're not so sharp. But these look really good. Plenty of sharp shots. And so that highlights probably the biggest game changer for me with this camera. And one reason I finally pulled the trigger towards the mirrorless is just with all the stabilization features, you know, how slow you can get the shutter and still get great shots. I do a ton of photography, as you guys know, at night. And therefore, for me, that's just totally useful. Okay, let's go more into this area. Another thing that is kind of hard to show and is very subtle, that's the dynamic range. So I was impressed from day one, but the more I shoot with it, the more I realize the dynamic range on this camera is definitely better than on my old camera. With the BSI sensor, apparently you can kind of tell ISOs generally can be lower than they used to be by about 1 stop. So just for low light situations, it's so much better than my D4. So, and then of course, the autofocus works really well in low light thanks to these advances as well. So that's a big, big plus, and again, why I will tolerate those nuisances that I started the video with, and I still enjoy using the camera. So there is also, of course, I should mention another thing, and that is just the autofocus itself, especially with the most recent firmware update. I believe it's called 1.2. The eye tracking, face tracking now is fantastic. It was already very good, but I think now it's really good. I can't compare it to Sony, Canon, whatever, and I don't really care. It's miles ahead what I came from my SLR, and for what I do for street photography, it's perfect. It doesn't even need to be that good. It's like a luxury, you know. It's like heated seats in my car. I don't need heated seats, but if I have them, great. I care much more about the IBIS and dynamic range stuff, because that actually does have a pretty big impact on how I shoot and what I can shoot. especially in low light in the city without the use of a tripod, which I rarely carry around because it's annoying. Totally hit that guy. Anyway, so those are the key things that I love about the camera. I can summarize in general that it's just fun to shoot with it. I mean, you know, despite those little nuisances, I do enjoy using it. It is fun, and as I underscored on my channel, on this channel, many times, for me, it's very important just can I enjoy using the camera? And for this camera, it's a resounding yes. It's fun to use, so I have no regrets getting it, and I can recommend it to anybody who has an SLR, and like a D850 or a D4, and is thinking to go mirrorless and get the Z6 or Z6II. I think you will not be disappointed. Having said that, if you love your D4 or D850 or D5 or whatever you're using, D750, and you enjoy it, keep using it. This isn't to say that you need this camera to have fun with photography. It's just that, you know, if you get one, you're probably going to like it too, despite those little nuisances. All right, so a couple other things I should mention before I forget as well is the battery life. No problemo. I've been using it for months now. When I first got one, I was a little apprehensive. Technically speaking, it's probably not as good as my old D4, but the battery life is great, so I don't have really any issues with it, especially with the grip and 2 batteries in there. Not once in all my shooting so far, whether it was jobs for work or just for fun, have I actually ran both batteries all the way down. I can get probably close to 2,000 shots on 2 batteries, or about 1,600 realistically if I'm chimping a lot and looking at the screen. And another thing just about ergonomics, again, after using it for so long, it's lighter, smaller, little less long than my D4, regardless of, especially with the Z lenses. So it's just a more comfortable camera to use. Again, I know it looks big and heavy like this because most of people use like other cameras that are much smaller, but for me, this is a small camera. This is a small light camera, so that's a big plus. So it was a nice change to move over to this thing from the old D4. And which is why I'm using this more and more. I still use my D4, I still like it, but this is just more and more. Despite those nuisances that I mentioned in the beginning, it's become a regular camera for me. And yeah, and one last thing. I don't shoot that much video, but I'm starting to do video. Of course, we're doing video, you know, for the channel. We do also shoot videos for Rico, as some of you may have noticed on their channel. And this is also useful for that. I mean, it's obviously fantastic at video. So I'm not, you know, we don't really talk about video stuff so much on this channel, but I can just say that I have experienced it, and it's really good. Even though in the camera, it doesn't shoot like, you know, log or whatever. It just shoots compressed video with the flat profile. It still looks really good, great dynamic range, and you can play with the colors a lot, which is important for me as I like to edit the colors in my photos and in the videos. So no complaints there. For somebody like me who's just getting into video, this is just way more than enough. Fantastic camera. All right, so we'll wrap it up there, guys. That's my 6-month impression of the Z6II. Like I said, a couple things I still hate, but overall, I love the camera. It's fantastic, and I can deal with those nuisances. And by the way, I should underline, everything that I complained about, except for the dial, which is really not a big deal, but those other things, they're all fixable with software. So if Nikon, you're listening, maybe you can fix some of these things, you know, like putting the subject tracking separate and changing how metering works while subject tracking. It's all about the interface. It's nothing really about physically with the camera. So I just want to point that out. It's nothing permanent, and I hope that down the line with further iterations, they'll fix those things. And then I'll have no complaints about this camera. It'll be basically a perfect camera for me. All right, so that's enough rambling. Thank you so much, guys, for watching today. And remember always, challenge your eye. Oh, hey guys, you're still here. Wow, you must be a huge fan of iExplore to watch all the way to the end of the video. We really appreciate that. That's a huge help because it makes our videos more popular. The YouTube algorithm cares about these kinds of things. But since I have your attention still, I hope you know that we do have a Patreon and also YouTube channel memberships. And if you sign up with either of those, you could get access to our Tokyo Photo Spot map. Also, if you're interested in any of the gear that I use in the videos, or also some of the gear that we use to shoot the videos, all of the referral links for that stuff is in the description below. And if you click on those, that also helps us out immensely. Finally, we do sell some merch. We have iExplore branded t-shirts, and also on my own personal homepage, I sell prints. So if that interests you, again, links in the description below. But just the fact that you guys watched all the way to the end, we really appreciate. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.